The truth about my parents. I am an old man now. I live alone in a small house. I have children, but they don't visit me often. Sometimes I feel lonely and I think about my life when I was young. There is one memory that stays with me. It is a memory I can never forget, no matter how hard I try. When I was a boy, I thought my parents were my real parents. They were kind and loving. They always made sure I was happy. They took care of me and gave me everything I needed. I never worried about anything. I always felt safe with them. I thought everything was perfect. But one day everything changed. I was 15 years old and I learned the truth. I remember that day very clearly. It was a quiet afternoon. I was sitting with my mother in our living room. She was looking at me with tears in her eyes. She took a deep breath, and then she said, "I have something to tell you." I didn't know what she meant. I was confused and a little scared. "What is it, Mother?" I asked, looking at her. She took my hand gently, but she seemed nervous. She looked down for a moment, then looked at me again. "We are not your real parents," she said softly. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked and confused. My heart hurt, and my mind was full of questions. I didn't know what to think. I had always believed they were my real parents. I wanted to ask more, but I couldn't speak. The words just wouldn't come out. My mother explained that I was not born in their house. They had found me in an orphanage when I was a baby. They took me in and raised me as their own. They loved me as their own child. I was surprised and very confused. After that day, I couldn't stop thinking about my real parents. Where were they? Who were they? Why did they leave me? Why didn't they come for me? I had so many questions and I felt so lost. I decided I had to find them. I needed to know the truth about who I really was. The next few days were filled with confusion and sadness. I couldn't stop thinking about the things my mother had told me. I wanted to know more, but I didn't know how to start looking for my real parents. Where should I go? Who could I ask? My world felt turned upside down and I felt lost. I spent a lot of time thinking about the orphanage. I wondered if it was still there. I didn't know where it was, but I decided I had to find it. One day, I packed a small bag and left the house. I was scared, but I knew I had to go. I needed answers. I walked for hours, asking people if they knew where the orphanage was. Most people didn't know, but some remembered it. It was a small building outside the town. I finally found the place. It looked old and quiet. There were no children playing outside. Everything seemed still. I walked up to the door and knocked. A woman opened the door. She looked at me with a curious expression. "Can I help you?" she asked. I told her I was looking for information about my real parents. I explained everything to her. She listened carefully but didn't say much. After a few moments, she nodded and said, "I think I remember you. You were a baby when they brought you here, but I don't know where they went. I was disappointed. I had hoped she would have more answers, but she didn't. She told me that my parents had left quickly, and there was nothing left behind. She couldn't give me any other information. I didn't know what to do. I had so many questions, but I didn't know where to look next. I felt hopeless. My search for my real parents had not brought me any closer to the answers I needed. I was tired and sad, but I didn't give up. I decided to visit more places. I asked more people. I traveled to different towns, hoping someone would remember something about my parents. It felt like an endless journey, but I knew I couldn't stop. I had to know the truth. After many weeks of searching, I finally found a man who had known my real parents. He said they had been kind people. They were poor, but always took care of me. He told me they had to leave me at the orphanage because they couldn't take care of me anymore. He said they loved me very much. His words made me feel a little better, but I still had many questions. Where were they now? Why did they leave me? I couldn't find them, and I didn't know where to go next. My heart was heavy, but I kept searching. I felt so alone after hearing that story. The man had told me that my parents loved me, but they had to let me go. I didn't understand. Why did they have to leave me? Why couldn't they keep me? These questions were always in my mind, and they hurt. For weeks I kept looking for answers. I visited many people. I went to different towns, asking about my parents, but no one knew where they were. It felt like I was chasing a ghost, searching for something that wasn't there. I started to lose hope. One day, while I was sitting by the road, tired and upset, an old woman stopped by. She saw the sadness on my face and asked, "Are you okay, young man?" I looked up at her. "I'm looking for my parents," I said. "I don't know where they are. I don't know why they left me." She sat down next to me. "I can help you," she said softly. "I knew your parents. I know where they went." My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't believe it. Finally, someone who could help me. "Please, tell me everything," I said eagerly. The old woman told me that my parents had been from a small village far from here. They had fallen on hard times and they couldn't take care of me anymore. She said they were heartbroken when they left me at the orphanage. They loved me very much, but they thought it was best for me to have a better life. The woman told me that my parents had always wanted to come back for me, but something had happened to them. They were forced to leave the village, and no one knew where they went after that. Her words made my heart ache. I finally knew that my parents had never forgotten me. They loved me, and they had tried to come back. But life had been cruel to them. I didn't know what to do with this new information. It was more than I had ever hoped for, but it didn't answer all of my questions. Where were they now? Could I ever find them? I continued to search. I couldn't stop. I had to find my parents, no matter what. The hope I had been searching for was finally in my hands, and I wasn't going to let it go. I kept searching. Every day I walked through new towns and villages. My legs were tired and my feet hurt, but my heart pushed me forward. I couldn't stop now. I had learned that my parents loved me, and they had never wanted to leave me. One afternoon, I reached a village I had never seen before. It was small and peaceful. The houses were old, but well kept. I went to a local cafe to rest and ask for directions. I didn't have much hope, but I had to try. At the cafe, an old man sat by the window. He looked at me and smiled. "Are you new here?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, I am looking for my parents," I said. "They were from a small village. I don't know where they went. Can you help me?" The old man's face changed when he heard my words. "You're looking for your parents?" he asked quietly. "What are their names?" I told him what I knew. I didn't know much, but I said the names of the places where I had grown up. The man thought for a moment, then said, "I remember them. Your mother and father were good people. I knew them very well." My heart raced. I couldn't believe it. This man knew my parents. I asked him to tell me more, and he did. The man told me that my parents had once lived in a small house on the edge of the village. They had worked hard and were always kind to everyone. He said that they were forced to leave when their lives became too difficult. They didn't have enough money, and they couldn't take care of me. "They were very sad," he said, "but they loved you. I know they did. They talked about you all the time." His words made me feel both happy and sad. It was good to know that my parents had always loved me, but it hurt to hear how hard their lives had been. They didn't deserve that. The man gave me directions to where they had lived. It was not far from where we were. I felt a new strength inside me. I knew I was getting closer to finding them. I thanked the man and quickly left the cafe. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to see the place where my parents had lived. It was time to find the truth, even if it was difficult to hear. I followed the old man's directions carefully. I walked through narrow streets, past small houses, and reached the edge of the village. There I found a small old house. It looked quiet and empty, but I could feel something special about it. I stood there for a moment, just looking. I didn't know what I would find inside, but I was ready to face whatever was waiting for me. I knocked on the door, and after a long moment, it slowly opened. A woman stood in the doorway. She was older than I remembered, but there was something about her face that felt familiar. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was soft, and her eyes looked at me with kindness. I didn't know what to say. I had been looking for so long, and now I was standing in front of her. My heart beat faster. Are you my mother?" I asked, my voice shaking. The woman's eyes widened in surprise. She looked at me for a long time, and then she slowly smiled. "Yes," she said softly, "I am your mother." Tears filled my eyes. I had found her. After all these years, I had found my mother. She stepped forward and hugged me tightly. I couldn't believe it. I had always wondered where they had gone, and now I was here, with her, at last. "Why did you leave me?" I asked, my voice full of emotion. Her eyes were filled with sadness. "We had no choice," she said. "Life was very hard. We couldn't take care of you anymore. But we never stopped thinking about you. Every day we hoped you would be okay." I felt so many different emotions at that moment. I was happy to have found my mother, but I was also angry at the way life had treated us. I didn't understand why we had to suffer. But in her arms, all those feelings seemed to disappear. I realized that she had never stopped loving me, even though we had been apart for so long. I stayed with her for hours, talking and sharing stories. She told me everything that had happened after I was taken away. She told me how hard it had been for her to let go, but how she had always hoped to find me one day. Finally, it was time for me to leave. I had found my mother, but I couldn't forget the life I had with the family that had raised me. As I walked away from the house, I knew I had to make a decision. I had found the truth, but I still didn't know where I truly belonged. I spent many days thinking about everything. I had found my real mother, but I still missed the people who had raised me. My mind was full of confusion. I didn't know if I should stay with my mother or return to the family that had always cared for me. One morning, I decided to visit the family that had raised me. I walked back to their house. It was a small, simple home, just like I remembered. When I arrived, they were sitting outside, enjoying the sun. They looked up in surprise when they saw me. "Where have you been?" the old man asked. "I found my real mother," I said quietly. The woman's face changed. I could see the sadness in her eyes, but she didn't say anything. She just sat there looking at me. I sat down beside them, not knowing what to say next. My heart was heavy with the choice I had to make. I had always thought they were my real parents, and they had treated me like their own child. But now I knew the truth. "Do you want to go back to her?" the old man asked gently. I looked at them both. They had given me a good life. They had loved me and taken care of me. But now I had found my mother. "I don't know what to do," I said softly. "I love you both. You were always there for me." The old man smiled gently. "We know, son. We always knew that you might want to find your real family one day. But we also know that love is not about blood. It's about care and kindness." I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about his words. My heart ached, but I knew he was right. The family that had raised me had loved me with all their heart, and that love was real. After a while, I stood up and turned to them. "I think I will stay with you," I said. "You are my family. You gave me love when I needed it the most." The old man stood up and hugged me. "We are glad to hear that," he said softly. I stayed with them, and over time I grew to understand the true meaning of family. It was not just about who you were born to. It was about the love and care you shared with others. And in the end, that was all that mattered. I had found the truth, and I had found my place in the world.